John Lear, so I would hope that they find their way.
Well, I will give them an opportunity to speak whenever anyway, so it's,
We now have 3.
You do have your alternate on the line.
Director Riley, would you like to do a roll call vote?
no,
I'll call.
not a vote. Okay, no, it's a good point. Thank you, attorney. So Alvin, are you available to participate as a committee member? And then I'll ask you again that if Karen does show up.
Well, if Karen, give her a few minutes, and if she show up, if not, I'll get off.
Well, let me ask
Yeah.
Dave Laredo a question, which is more procedural. If we start with Alvin and then Karen does show up, can we still switch back to Karen?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Then
Okay.
the alternate would return to the alternate non-speaking role.
Right.
Alvin, it sounds like something is in your background.
It is. I'm gonna cut it off.
Okay, well, why don't we just convene with the two of us right now as we get into the discussion items. Well, there are only a few action items. We'll proceed with just the two of us and see if Karen shows up, okay? All right, so no public comments that we know of, so, or did I wait long enough?
Director Riley, we do not have any members of the public with their hands raised. So we don't have any
Okay.
public comment at this time.
Thank you. Well, I just want, whatever members of the public out there, just raise your hand when we get to an item and we'll see how it works. Okay, so we're turning to the board or the committee for action items. So action item number 1 is the minutes of the February 1st meeting. Are there any comments or questions about the minutes? Alvin, I'm going to ask you to participate on the action items.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
I had a chance to review the minutes and I didn't see any corrections, so I'd be happy to make a motion to approve the minutes of the February 1st committee meeting.
I'll second.
Okay, roll call vote, please. Joel?
Yes, Director Riley,
Aye.
There she go. I'll go back to alternate.
Let's finish this
Let's
vote.
get this.
Okay,
vote.
yeah, finish it up.
Finish this vote. So I vote aye.
Aye.
Director Adams, and Director Edwards.
Aye.
Okay, now back to Karen, since you were late, I activated our alternate, which was Alvin. But now we're going to reverse course and Alvin's going to go back to the audience. And you are now active on the committee.
I'm sorry, I had some trouble getting on. Did you just approve the minutes?
Yes.
I noticed, maybe you already corrected this, the committee members present. I was present on the February 1st meeting, and I believe Chair Edwards who's an alternate was present, but as a member of the public.
I would like to make that change if we can verify that somehow.
I went back to make sure that, unless I'm completely misremembering, but I think that's right, that I participated in the meeting.
And I must say that I did not look at that element of the minutes. I looked more at the content. So I would be happy to amend my motion, even though we have already voted on it.
I know I'm willing to reconsider that motion with that action with a new motion.
Yes.
And I would second that for discussion, and I don't think we need a discussion. So roll call, please, Joelle, again,
Yes.
for the new motion.
Director Riley,
Aye.
Director Paul,
Aye.
Director Adams.
Aye.
So the minutes are approved as amended. Okay. Thank you, Karen, for paying attention to some things we skipped over. Next item is the schedule of meetings coming up for our committee. What's nice is that it's pretty consistent all year long. And the same time, so I like all that. Is there any discussion about the schedule?
Well, I just want to point out that the September meeting is on a Tuesday, and I assume that's because of the Labor Day holiday.
Yes,
I don't have a problem with it. I'm just calling attention
Yep.
to it.
Yes,
Right.
that's correct.
okay, no problem.
And of course, as with all our committees, we try to schedule the meetings, but if we don't have enough subject matter, we would proceed with canceling the meeting. Easier to cancel than to schedule on the fly.
Yes, and I'm glad we're doing it this way. All right, well, if any member of the public has a comment to make, please raise your hand as we go along. And, but meantime, we're just going to assume there's no public comment on this. So I'd look for a motion to approve the schedule for our committee.
I'll move.
Second,
Roll call, please, Joelle.
Yes, Director Riley,
Aye.
Director Paul,
aye.
Director Adams.
Aye.
Okay, that's the action items. We're not ready to adjourn yet, though. Just because the action's done doesn't mean we're done. Dave, I'll go to you on the discussion items, and then as we go along, I still remind the public that if you have a comment to make, please let us know, and we'll let you in. So Dave, item 3, please. The marine
Yep.
fisheries letter.
Right, so this letter was in the board packet. This was the item that was missing the second page in the board packet, but it was appropriate for conversation and discussion here at this committee. This is from the National Marine Fisheries Service, related to the board's actions or inactions on the ASR bypass pipeline. I think the key takeaways are on the second page. The first paragraph on the second page concludes with the 2 sentences. We believe the bypass pipeline is a critically necessary improvement that will ensure optimization of the ASR project and preservation of Carmel River low flow season stream flows. Accordingly, we urge the committee to make a timely recommendation to construct the pipeline. And then in the second to last paragraph, or the second paragraph on this page, they go on to say modifications of the ASR operations would invalidate the terms of the MOU and trigger reevaluation of the project under relevant state and federal authorities, including the ESA, which is the Endangered Species Act. NMFS therefore recommends NPWMD move forward with the parallel pipeline, a straightforward infrastructure upgrade, rather than repudiate an effective operational scheme. So I think they're pretty clear on how they feel about it. But I think it's important that this information comes forward to this committee here for discussion, but also to help inform any recommendation you may have in terms of bringing back the addendum to the ASR EIR. I should tell you that the Monterey One Water at their board meeting last week indicated a desire to revisit the SEIR certification. And in so doing, if they do certify, that would conceivably serve the same purpose as our certification of the addendum. So we'll also have to keep that in mind. Monterey One Water will be coming to ask us for money. So on the March board meeting, there will be an action item to approve an amendment to our cost sharing agreement. They've got a quote for bringing that document back of $230,000 to rewrite project description elements and address a few other items. So just sitting on it for a year has basically cost $230,000 to bring it back up to speed, of which they will ask us for $172,500. But they are moving forward on that, and it appears that they intend to leave the CalAm elements of the SEIR in the project description. So, you know, there's 2 paths afoot, but this notification by nymphs, I think is important.
Dave, I want to go back to a couple points in the letter. First of all, the letter is dated January 29th. After, this is an email, I guess, which was sent to me, which I did not get because I don't activate that email address anymore. And so I didn't see this until you forwarded it to me, and I appreciate it, and then to the committee. So it was only a week or 9 days ago that I first learned about this. Anyway, that's not a point. The point I want to make is that this letter was dated January 29th. In the meantime, the committee had acted and the full board had acted. So this is kind of an untimely letter. It's kind of like crying wolf in the 10th inning when the game's over in the 9th. Sort of. I don't know if it's exactly over.
I suspect they weren't very cognizant of any of our actions. I think they just heard about this issue, were made aware of the Marina Coast Water District's proposal for playing with the water rights and so forth, and said, oh, at some point we need to sit down and write a letter. So I think they're probably.
They found out about it at the December meeting of the quarterly water budget committee, so that was kind of what drove that.
John, there's a lot of feedback in your.
Yeah, John, you've got the weirdest, that's the oddest sounding microphone you've had. Yeah.
Yeah, Nora found out about it at the December quarterly water budget meeting, which kind of really just took them that long to write the letter. So I don't think they were really up to speed with all the board action.
John, slow down. There's an awful lot of feedback and it's really hard to follow what you're saying.
Okay. Is this any better?
Sounds the same.
No.
Much better.
Yeah, well, we'll see if John can fix his microphone issue. Maybe he'll have to call in and use his phone.
Go ahead, Karen.
I do have a question, a factual question about some statements in that paragraph you read from, Dave, at the top of page 2. They talk about enabling CalAmp to simultaneously inject and extract water throughout the year. And then they talk about to address the constraint that would allow them to inject in the spring and summer. So I'm really confused, or I'm missing something, because I thought that it was only allowed to, CalAmp was only allowed to inject December through May if stream flow were
permit. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I was going to say they missed. So that sentence that begins or that says, throughout the year is just wrong. So yeah, that's their error.
So, I mean, it's important fact because we're talking at a maximum December through May injections at a maximum. That's not the whole year. And
That's right.
Certainly not in the summer either.
No, in fact, the whole idea is put it in the winter when there's abundant flows and take it out when you're in your summer dry period. But
and gets back to the question we went round around on during a district board meeting about how much impact does this constraint actually have on injection, and how much difference would it make to have this second pipeline? I mean, I don't know if we're going to even talk about that today, but I just point out those facts seem important to me.
Well,
Right.
Karen, I think your point is worth our committee understanding, just as a reminder about what some of the issues were at the time we were making our recommendation to the full board, but also the decision that was made by the full board, not just beyond the committee. I wanted to go back a little bit. Well, unless Karen, you had some more to add?
No, I just wanted to be sure that I was understanding the facts correctly about that. And Looks like
Well,
the fishery doesn't.
Okay, sorry. And Dave, so when I saw this letter, my first response was, well, it's kind of like public comment as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
It was offered. It's kind of late. We had reasons that were beyond this letter in terms of our own action. And so I didn't know what kind of response is necessary. So my question back to you is, well, no, before I go there, my question is, should we officially respond to this letter? But I want to ask that question later. I want to go back to the second paragraph on that page, second page, where they talked about protests and problems and repudiate and, multi-year protests, but also they talked about settlements. So it seems to me that even though National Marine Fisheries, is complaining about potential violations of their rules or of their decisions in the past, it seems also like they have opened the door to say that protests have led to settlements and settlements have led to changes. And if that's true, then why are we, or should we kind of treat this as kind of an ultimatum statement? Because if there's a protest coming down the road somewhere, it does lead to changes in the interpretation or changes in the rule or changes anyway, either way.
Yeah, I think you characterize it correctly. I mean, they're basically saying, hey, we worked so hard to get to a level of agreement, and now this would undermine all that agreement that we put together. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't reopen.
Well, and I'm not even asking to go down that road. I'm just asking as a possibility.
Yeah.
Because what they did also offer at the very, very last two-liner paragraph is to offer to meet with us or the committee or maybe you and where to go next.
Right.
Okay, so do you have a suggestion on how we treat this letter?
Well, I think we should acknowledge the letter and say, I think we have to figure out what Monterey One Water is also doing. And frankly, you're going to need to hear the next discussion item as well, because
Yeah.
in the near term, we've got some constraints that will affect ASR as well that you need to hear about. But I think at a minimum, I will send a note to Mandy acknowledging the letter and suggesting that there still needs to be some passage of time as we contemplate what to do.
And Dave, it's important to point out the factual error.
Yeah, because even where it says would be constrained in the spring and the summer,
Yeah.
Well, end of May is still spring. It's not summer. So there is no potential for injection in summer. So, yeah.
Well, in my last comment on this this letter or our approach to the letter is that one of my arguments about suggesting denial on the permit or the CIR or the EIR request was that I wanted the pipeline to be tied to a water supply, not just a piece of infrastructure that exists waiting for something else to happen. And so my concern was that if there's going to be a bypass pipeline, then let's tie it to a water supply. And that was kind of a year-round operational use of the pipeline, as opposed to a 1 or 2 or 3 months of any one, wet year, where we might run into the conflict of, bypassing, two sources, one north, one south.
Right.
So that was kind of my argument, and that's the rationale that at least I'm still hanging on to. And so that's why I think it is appropriate that the Monterey One Water Board take up this issue with the bypass and a water supply, so that there's a year-round arrangement for using the pipeline, not just a couple of months out of a year, in my kind of understanding of it.
Yeah, I don't think it would ever be that way, though, because if you now have parallel pipelines, you wouldn't split the stream to go in the same direction you would only use them to go in opposite directions. So, getting year-round use is pretty unlikely.
You can't imagine a circumstance when we would want or need to be doing both, to be using both of those pipes if they exist.
Yeah, but it's a limited time of the year. It really does go to the ASR season. Because what you're trying to do is move water from either Pure Water Monterey plus Pure Water Monterey expansion, or desal and Pure Water Monterey to the south. And in both cases, you would have the same, few months of conflict potentially in any normal to wet year. But I don't foresee that you would have conflict in all months of the year. And there would be availability in some months of the year that doesn't help you because it's not the ASR injection season.
Mhm.
So, and we'll see a little bit of that on the next subject
Next letter. Mhm.
I'm going to talk about. But I understand what George is saying.
Well, let me just remind the public, if any participant wants to speak up, let us know. You'll have your chance. As it stands now, we think we assume, and what you're saying, GM, you will send a letter acknowledging this and acknowledging also a correction that needs to be made about it. And also to leave it open to whether we meet with them or not, just based on what happens over the next few months.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments from committee members? Joelle, any hands up? Oh, John Lear, let's try John Lear again.
Yeah, is that better?
Wonderful.
Okay, the Zoom does my microphone different settings than microphone.
Unmute.
Yes, I was saying before that the timing of the letter was related to their participation in the quarterly water budget process and not really what the board was doing. So they found out about it in December at the quarterly water budget meeting, and I'm not sure they were tracking the actions of the board.
Thanks for that. That helps me, be neutral. Okay. Thank you, John. Okay, if there are no comments anywhere, for no hands up from the public, unless there are any other comments from the committee, I'd like to go to the next item. So let's go to the next item. Dave, can you?
Great. Yeah, and did everybody get a copy of the email from Stephen Westhoff of the State Water Board on this subject?
I
Yes.
did.
Okay, good. So there was kind of a he's right in that the limit for the effective diversion limit on the withdrawals from the Carmel go to their legal right beginning January 1st. But because the water year starts October 1st, that first water year, the 2021-22 water year, technically, let's just assume for a second, September 30th, another milestone is missed. The state drops the effective diversion limit to 6,310 acre feet. That 6,310 would actually remain in effect for the last 3 months, October, November, December. And then beginning January 1, the limit goes to the 3,376 off their water right. So that 2021-22 year is actually kind of a hybrid year. But I ceded the point to Steve Westhoff that, yes, we agree that it goes to the legal limit as of January 1st, 2022. And so that was just, I think he was trying to point out that maybe we got something wrong. We are in complete agreement, and we do realize that beginning January 1st, it goes to that limit. Now, I included an exhibit that showed you how compliance was calculated has been calculated. So every October at the close of the prior water year, these tables 5A, 5B, 5C are populated only once a year. So it's like an annual report. And it really has been somewhat of an onerous calculation because the state has treated Malpaso water as actual Cal-Am diversions from the river. Sand City desal has been a direct offset to the effective diversion limit. Obviously, Pure Water Monterey deliveries offset the diversion limit, but 600 acre feet of ASR were used or included as part of Cal-Am's production. So the best thing that came out of the email, and the reason this minimizes our discussion about the confusion in reporting, is the last paragraph of Steve's email says, the existing diversion calculation and reporting methods reflected in Exhibit 4A will be inapplicable after December 31st, 2021. And that's great news, because one of our concerns was if you still have to do these offsets, these are actually separate water rights. The ASR water right is a separate water right and it's subordinate. Table 13 water is a separate water right and interruptible and subordinate. So it makes the math cleaner. So I think we can leave any discussion about Exhibit 4A and some of the potential complexities have been removed by virtue of the statement that he made in that last paragraph. What it doesn't do, though, is solve the physical complexities. And when I say physical complexities, what I mean is that, and it goes a little bit back to the parallel pipeline or the bypass pipeline, but it goes to how does the company comply with the CDO and still make deliveries for customer service in the regions that they have obligations to serve. And that would be, when I say regions, we know the service area, but there are plumbing issues or hydraulics issues. And so certain times of the year, water to serve City of Seaside is going to have to be addressed through Seaside Wells. Water to serve Carmel Valley Village and the Upper Valley has to be addressed. And when you start layering in all of these monthly obligations, it becomes apparent to all of us, to Cal-Am staff and our staff, that we may have some conflicts that are going to be difficult to overcome in the near term. So I see that Chris Cook is online as an attendee. If we could move him into panelist, Joelle. And then John Lear, if you could maybe step in to introduce the physical constraint issues. And then as Chris comes over, he can join in. And there he is. All right. John, were you going to open with the PowerPoint?
I sent you the PowerPoint, Joelle. Did you see that? If we could bring that up, yeah, awesome. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Chris to begin.
Are you able to see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
So Chris, you can just ask Joelle to do next slide, I guess, since this is up. You don't need to do it from yours.
Looks like Chris may be frozen, so I can.
I can.
Can you speak, Chris?
I think he just disappeared.
Okay. Well, I can. Chris was planning on doing this part.
He's
but I
here.
can-
Oh, he's
Chris
back.
is here.
oh,
Yeah,
okay.
there he is.
Hello.
Hello.
Great. So am I queued up, John, or?
Your PowerPoint's up.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you, Dave, for the introduction. Yeah, we were just talking about the next water year and, going from that 8310 to the acre feet off the Carmel River to the 3376 and what that would mean for operations. And I would just see this as an informational item. I think there were a lot of questions at one of the previous board meetings related to, bar charts we'd shown that were color coded, and I think it might be a nice background on some of our pumping locations and operations. And just particularly speaking to this next, water year and how that is going to have a significant change for our system. I think it sounds like maybe Director Riley, you're, in consensus, it sounds like the need for it, just the implementation method of moving it forward might be just the question, but regardless, hopefully this is helpful. So great.
Yeah,
And
good.
let's proceed. Okay, maybe Joel, if you could go to the next slide. And so I was just going to show, first of all, where for our Monterey main system, where different pumping locations for source waters are, because they're really limited to 4 locations for our district. And you can see here is kind of a general map of the peninsula that overlays with our Monterey main area. Joel, if you could go to the next, thanks. So our first well pumping locations are along Carmel River. So we have lower and upper valley wells. And I think for, most of our customers, that's probably the first thing that they think of in terms of our source water for the Monterey main system, the wells along the Carmel River and the distribution of that for our system. If you can go to the next slide, please. So then the next one is the Sand City desal plant. So we have 4 intake wells along Tioga and Bay Road there. So that's an additional supply location separate from the Carmel River. Next slide, please. And then we have the Seaside regional wells. So what that means is essentially these are wells that we have inside city of Seaside, but that are west of General Jim Moore area. So we have 5 wells in that location that primarily serve the Seaside area for their distribution. And next slide, please. And then finally, our 4th location are the ASR wells. So we have, as I'm sure everybody's aware, we have the Santa Margarita site with ASR wells 1 and 2, and then we have the Seaside Middle School site adjacent to that with wells 3 and 4. So essentially for production of water to our Monterey main system, it's really limited to these 4 locations where we can pump water to have it treated and distributed to our customers. So go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and keep in mind, everybody, that this is very simplified because the Peralta well would actually be up really kind of in the ASR oval, and Ord Grove would be further north. So the circle that says Seaside Region Wells is just kind of to get you to a sense of place, but it's not trying to be precise.
Great.
It should be an oval and not a circle.
Exactly. No, that's exactly right. Okay. Any other comments or?
Director Riley, I have Sarah Hardgrave as a attendee. I believe she would like to make comment. Is this an appropriate time for her to make comment, or would you like her to make that comment after Chris concludes his presentation?
I'd prefer to hear the full presentation from Chris, and then we can go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. So, and then if I can just ask that you remember these colors roughly, because this correlates to the bar chart I had shown before where there were questions and didn't get a chance to, or didn't fully explain it previously. So next slide, please.
Did we move over to the next slide, or?
Yes, Joel.
I don't think so. No, it's still on the current. Oh, there we go. Okay, so basically, we talk a bit about annual water consumption, but really in order to feed the system, we have to look at it monthly. It varies significantly monthly with, more demand during the summer and less during the winter. And then also different sources have different requirements. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So the chart here, you can see at the top of those dashed lines is basically, if you're looking at a historic average, what you might expect for each month in terms of acre feet per month to get approximately 10,000 acre feet for total annual consumption for the Monterey main system. So, you have the question there of how do we fill each one of these bars in a monthly basis with the different supplies that we have. So, so as you can see, the January, February, we're about the 700, and then July and August, it goes almost up to 1,000. So it does vary significantly based on month. And so the lines in blue, those would be the projections for the next water year, 21, 22 from the Carmel River. So this is when we're down to 3,376 acre feet for the Carmel River. But, we'd want to maximize that as much as possible because we have, because if you don't, then you're over pulling from the Seaside Basin. So if we have a legal limit we can use, we definitely want to use that and save what we can from for the Seaside Basin to stay there. But at the same time, you don't want to go too low because you also have maintenance flows through the Begonia plant. You don't want to over pump during the summertime when it's critical for the river. So there are kind of variables that you stay within, but you can see it kind of stays between that 200 to 400 acre feet. We're hoping to get more with the 2 new booster stations and some additional ASR wells, but that's kind of what we've tested so far. Next slide, please. So then, you go to that second source that we had, which is Sand City Desal. I put that at about 20 acre feet a month, which we've historically done about 200 to 210, but I'm assuming, we're looking to do a new intake well that could help with our staying within permitted requirements for the total dissolved solids. So we might get, we're looking to get an increase there. So you get a little bit more water from Sand City Desal, but it doesn't fill up that monthly glass too much. Next slide, please. So then this slide is the relatively darker green is those wells that are in City of Seaside that are west of General Jim Moore, and as Dave and George pointed out, it should have been an oval shape, not a circular one. So that one, we have 5 wells there. Assuming we can run those relatively reliably, we get relatively consistent production out of those, and you see that monthly totals there. So then, then the question has risen. You have the dashed lines at the top.
Hey, Chris, pause just for a second. So the committee understands. So the Seaside wells, the 5 that Chris is talking about are not plumbed in a manner that they can deliver water to the Monterey pipeline and ship it to, Pacific Grove or Monterey or what have you. It goes into the distribution system that serves the City of Seaside primarily.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can push it through the distribution system to, parts of Old Monterey, which is what's done now. But the reason for the Monterey pipeline was you cannot push water through a distribution system through what we call the hydraulic trough between, Old Monterey and City Pacific Grove without creating issues with the distribution system, which is why the Monterey pipeline was built to bypass all of that. But none of these wells are plumbed in a manner to get water directly into the Monterey pipeline.
Yep. So yeah, if you try and, as Dave said, if you try and push too much water through the distribution system, you get a lot of back pressure issues around, where the Naval Postgraduate School is. So that's why, we had that 36-inch transmission main that allows, for instance, ASR wells to go straight to Forest Lake tanks, where we have 3 5 million gallon tanks that can really distribute it to Monterey, Pebble Beach, Pacific Grove, those areas.
So,
Yeah.
A quick question. Does the
Yeah.
the Seaside wells that are now operated in an oval, does that get into the Monterey pipeline now?
No.
Not really. Oh, so go ahead, Dave.
I was just saying no.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, and the one thing I would add with those are when I say Seaside wells, it's not Seaside native water necessarily. I'm trying to focus just on infrastructure operations. So that could be, Seaside Native Water, Pure Water Monterey, ASR Bank, those kind of things. So I'm just looking at, infrastructure and where it can pump to. Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that makes it a little bit complicated is, looking at, okay, Begonia has certain maintenance flows, certain wells have constraints on where they can go. So you do have constraints within the bar chart of what you have to fit within. Great. And then those last dashed lines there, that's the remaining, part that we have to fill each month. And that's, and we only have one more physical pumping location that we can pump from. And that's the ASR wells, whether it's Santa Margarita site, Seaside Middle School site. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Joel. So this gets into the, so the kind of the darker green is the ASR wells, ASR well 1, the lighter green is ASR well 3. So you can see on this chart that, based on the 3376, we would need, the wells pumping, at least one of the ASR wells pumping year round. The second one, would be limited to the winter months or to the summer months when there's higher demand, which is actually a good thing because then you have, that ASR well 3 for injection if we can get that parallel, if we got the parallel pipeline. So that's actually a nice thing that it lines up with summer higher demand. But I think kind of the bottom line on this one is that, with the 3376, it would, with the reduction in Carmel River, it would require us to, be pumping from one of those wells likely year round, which has limitations on infrastructure in itself. Yeah, if you could go to the next slide, please. And the one other thing I would add on the last one, sorry, was just that I know David mentioned at the beginning about letters with Steve Westhoff on carryover and possibilities of that. And I would say, that sounds like an item being discussed. It might help for a couple months, but that would be it. And it would only be, for the next water year. So it has limitations there. So, okay. So then just looking at, I don't know. Oh, go ahead, George.
Just before you leave that point, and maybe we can just go back one chart just to see what you're saying. So the lightest green part of the bars from June through November. Is that where carryover water might be useful only for 1 year, or am I on a whole different track?
So carryover water would, go ahead, Dave, if you want to.
No, I was just going to say, the only way to use carryover credits for this one instance is apply it against your October, November, December period, because after that, the carryover concept is gone. So with the drop to the effective diversion limit on January 1, 2022, that's it. There's no more gamesmanship that can be done with carryover credit or missing milestones. Doesn't matter at that point. It's just you're at your 3376. But while we're on this chart, what you see from June through November is both ASR wells are in production to meet customer demand. And so they're both putting water out and moving it north to south. So it does mean that you would have capacity to inject in December through May, but you can't because this darker of the light green, the darker green, the ASR wells 1 and 2 bar is trying to move that water north to south. And so that's another example of your bidirectional conflict where you would have a well available, but you don't have the ability to get water to it.
Exactly. And I should have used different colors than 3 different shades of green.
Just be glad we're not colorblind.
Yeah. But yeah, that's exactly Dave's point. Since we would be needing at least one ASR well, year round. I mean, and I think, John might speak to this in terms of the general functionality of it. But yeah.
No, this is a good visual. I appreciate this picture you're drawing.
Yeah, and these do shift a little bit every couple months. I recalibrate them based on how we're doing operations because, you know, we haven't gotten to this level before where we're running Begonia this low and trying to maximize Seaside wells this much. So I'm always kind of figuring out like what our system can do. So like, don't assume that everything on this chart is accurate to the acre foot. So that's the challenges with it. Okay, Joel, if we could go to, and maybe John, if you wanted to speak to the next one, if you do a better job on those pipeline descriptions than I do, if that's all right. Hey, Joel, if we can go to the next slide.
Yes, thanks, Chris. I think that this slide shows exactly what Dave was talking about. Is if there were the spot in the road where you have two pipelines going beside each other, right now there's one pipeline in the road in General Jim Moore. And the blue line is water being recovered from ASR wells is being moved to the Monterey pipeline and transferred to the Forest Lake tanks. That line can also go backwards and bring water to the ASR wells in the winter. The other pathway that water can get from the valley to the ASR wells is the yellow line and go over the mountain into the Crest Reservoir tanks. As Dave stated, if the blue line needs to be functioning moving south in order to meet demand on the peninsula, it cannot be functioning moving water north, which is critical to the operation of the ASR wells. So when we were talking about losing water on fringe years, on the fringe months of some years for the parallel pipeline, we were doing our comparisons with the limit of 8310 on the river. But when the river limit goes down to 3376, it requires water moving south 365 days a year. So it effectively stops the ability for the district to operate, Cal-Am to operate the ASR program, and we cannot bank any more water through the program. The question, obvious question, as we bring this forward to report it is, well, why didn't anyone think of this? Why didn't anyone realize this would happen? And the answer to that question is the ASR project and the Pure Water Monterey project were supposed to exist with, as George said, another water supply, whether it was desal. If you built the desal plan, this would work. You would be able to do simultaneous injection and recovery of Pure Water Monterey, and it would be because water would be moving south the entire time, and the physical water that would be injected in the ASR wells would be the chemistry of desalinated water, but the water would be removed from wells in the valley, put into the Forest Lake tanks, served to meet demand, and you would have done the accounting on a paper ledger. So you would be injecting desal water and counting it as water diverted from the valley. If you were to build Pure Water Monterey expansion, this parallel pipeline is included as a component of that. So building out either one of the other water supplies solves this problem, and it was just never envisioned that these two projects would be built simultaneously and be trying to exist together for multiple years. So that's why we find ourselves in this situation.
And John, I would add, you know, the thing that really everything you said is correct. And then I think the thing that nobody assumed would happen is that, you know, we get to the end of 2021 and there's no new water supply, as John's saying. Like, people were, you know, assuming along the way it's going to get built and this, you know, problem would be solved with the building of future things. So now we're in a, you know, situation that wasn't planned in the design where we're down to 3376. And as John was saying, kind of where those two arrows are parallel running in different directions is where we have one pipe, and you can't run water in two directions in one pipe. And the other challenge is just, you know, we can say, oh, you know, do we, you know, the ASR, maybe we hold off on it. But, you know, the reality is with the numbers I've been running and reviewing with, you know, John and Dave and Ian and others is, you know, we need that ASR mitigate as much as we can the overdrafting of Seaside Basin, because, you know, right now we're really limited.
Right. And so for a period of 2 to 3 years minimum, could be 4, while waiting for a permanent water supply, as John said, either of which solve the problem. If the problem remains unsolved for those 3 to 4 year period, that means we're not doing any ASR injection, whether it's a good year or a bad year, weather-wise. We just are constrained from doing the injection. And unfortunately, in the pre-lifting of the CDO, the ASR operating regime has been primarily to use all the water that gets put in a year and take it out in the same year. Now, that's changed a little bit, and there is a built-up bank of about 1,000 acre feet, let's call it roughly. But if the system is very close to operating at the legal limits from both the Seaside natural, Seaside water and the Carmel water right, then pulling from the ASR bank, in addition to Pure Water Monterey, may be a requirement.
Saving grace.
And that bank won't last for very long because it's not been built up the way you would build it up in a post CDO world, where you'd have the ability to just, every good year, just put water in the ground and leave it there.
Yep.
So we'd run the risk of, using up that banked water and having zero in the ground and zero ability to inject any more in the ground for that interim period.
Yep. And if this winter continues to be as nice as the weather is for hiking outside, it's horrible for water source waters. So if it continues this way, we're going to be pulling from that ASR bank this water year. So
yeah. And you won't be getting any table 13 water. So
I'll have a few questions along these lines, but I'd like the presentation to continue, and then maybe Sarah Hargrave has a question or a comment.
I'm sorry, that was just a technical glitch. Sarah doesn't have a comment to make.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I talked with her side,
Okay.
so she's good. Thank you.
Okay. So Chris, please keep educating us.
no, this is, I think, John, that was the end of it, right?
Yes, could you advance it once more, Joel? Yeah, that is. So we could go back.
Well, I'd like to go back to the chart and go back to that bar chart that we were looking at, because that's kind of triggering my thinking. Yes. So Dave, I want to go back to your comment about 2 or 3 or 4 years into the future, about before things settle down to what we're doing. You're also comment about we may be having to pull the reserve water that's in the Seaside Basin and then use it up, and then we don't have the reserve anymore. So I'm concerned about, and then there's another aspect of this about how long it would take to construct the bypass pipeline. I think we've asked this question before, and maybe it was months and months and months ago, where I think Cal-Am was kind of ready to go. I think they were saying it would take maybe 3 months or 4 months or something to build. It's something in that ballpark. So now my question, maybe to Chris and to Dave, in just an overview of the risk of not. Let me just back up and make one other kind of preliminary statement. If the SEIR for Pure Water Monterey, or the expansion, or the desal project, either one is slowed down months, just whatever it is. And the desal is already in a month's delay. Months, it's plural, just months and months and months. Same with the desal in some fashion. So we're facing this current year with what I think is a squeeze point about where the water comes from and what our demands are and the capacity to deliver, the ability to deliver, and because of the pipeline squeeze problem. So my kind of question is a risk question. Are we kind of rolling the dice on this year, 2021, on being able to get through the year without a particular problem? technically, I mean, roll the dice.
Yeah, I
And
could-
if anything gets settled over the next few months into the summer months or whatever, anything gets settled, then at least we know where we're going. But right now we don't know where we're going. And we've got this dilemma for 2021.
Yeah, so, yeah, I would say the current year, so the water year ending September 30th, I'm highly confident we do not have a problem.
Mhm.
If the SEIR was resolved, see, if they're going to do $200,000 worth of updating of the SEIR, and if we were to approve it at our March board meeting, then you're probably in May for certification, which would work because if they could, no later than June, the company could go forward and get the project built, and the problem goes away. If we wait a year, then next year, which is the first year that includes the 3376, that's where things get really tight. I'll venture to say, I think we can make it through the year, but what we'll be doing is just what I've said earlier, is not putting any water into ASR, irrespective of what kind of water year it is, probably pulling water out of the bank and then position ourselves very poorly for the next water year. And there will still not be a permanent project built by that next water year, and possibly not even the water year after that. So, we're looking at a 3-year squeeze beginning January 1.
And I can just kind of dovetail off what Dave's saying. Yeah, exactly like he said. I mean, for this water year, we were fortunate in that it was just 1,000 acre foot deduction for the milestone and not 2,000 acre foot, which, there's gray area there. So that was a great positive for us. And then with the lack of rain, the one thing about this year is that means, we have that much more time to extract from ASR. So for this water year, I think we're good. If we got rain, now through the end, I think we could maximize that. So we really even want rain through the rest of the year. It's the next water year when we get down to the 3376, when it becomes, unfortunately, a lot more simple in it.
Simple and dramatic.
Yeah. And
Well,
yeah,
and
exactly.
it was going to be even harder for next year until we, I'm hopeful. I see that Kathy Horning's on the line, and I hope that she's seeing it my way. I'm pretty sure Steve Westhoff's seeing it my way. Just the way that they crafted the document does appear to let us use some carryover credit in the first 3 months of the next water year, because they only referred to water year and a date certain of December 31st. So that could be beneficial for the next water year. Absent that, we'd be a lot tighter.
Karen, you have a question?
Yeah, so is this problem essentially between time-wise, between now and the time that we get our additional water supply? So let's say 2.5 years from now, pure water expansion starts to produce, let's just say. At that point, in that situation, does this problem disappear even if we don't have the bypass pipeline?
Well, it's a great question. If it's pure water Monterey expansion, you get a bypass pipeline with that project. If it's desalination, as John was stating, you can use paper accounting, water accounting, to deem that the injections occurred, but it may be that it's not really Carmel River water. The only caveat would be that Marina Coast Water District might just say, wait a minute, technically our shared pipeline is available to you for ASR, you're not using it for ASR. So therefore, we're not making it available to you for desal, and who knows what happens. That shared pipeline agreement is a wild card as to what Marina Coast Water District might do if desal comes online.
And I would just add, Dave, to your point about, to Director Paul's question about Pure Water Monterey expansion. I mean, kind of going away from the water project names and the straight functionality, the functionality of it is to be able to pull as much water out of Seaside Basin as possible while still injecting ASR water. So, we've got the issue now because we have so little Carmel River water, we need to pull that much more out year round. And so that's why we have that constraint bottleneck during the ASR injection season. You add Pure Water Monterey expansion, that's that much more water we want to be pulling out from the Seaside Basin. So it's, it's basically the scenario we're in right now, but, having addressing more of the Seaside Basin, potential overpumping. So yeah, it would be very applicable for Pure Water Monterey expansion because you still need to pump that water out of the basin, if that makes sense.
I can hit on that too. That one thing that I forgot to say when I was is that if a bypass pipeline were built for operation for water year 2022, it would get ASR. You would have the ability to produce out of ASR 1 and 2, and the ability to inject into ASR 3 and 4. So you're at a reduced ability to build your bank up. So it doesn't completely solve the problem and allow ASR to operate 100% at 100% capacity. But since the question was about Pure Water Monterey, it comes with its own bypass pipeline and additional source wells. So then that frees ASR to operate fully with the expanded project.
I want to, Mary, do you want to say something or have a question or anything?
I just a lot of different things running through my mind, not the least of which is what we're talking about. To me, sounds like the timing isn't working out well. Example, if we knew for sure that Monterey One Water was going to go forward with the expansion, I feel like we would be able to go ahead, or it would be a lot more palatable, I should say, for the Water Management District to go ahead and build the other pipeline now. Knowing that we would be, if I've got this right, then reimbursed from Monterey One Water for the work that is done on that, because they would be part of this. That's part of what would come, as I heard, that's one of the bonuses. But then there's the other question is there going to be a long-term customer? And I don't know that we know the answer to that.
Well, and I want to spin off of that question, because I think, Dave, you may have said that if the SEIR is approved for the expansion, it seems to me there are two issues beyond that. I mean, first of all, just because they approve the SEIR, you still go back to the customer question that Mary just raised about, do we have an agreement? Now, my question maybe to Chris and to Dave both, if wherever it's relevant, is it possible to, let's just say, first of all, I think the odds are more in favor of expansion getting approved. It's also a near-term project as opposed to a longer term, less construction time, less expense. There's a lot of lessers related to that. But the key question still is going to be if Cal-Am is prepared to move forward with a water purchase agreement. Now, but that's my question that I want to spin off of Mary's question. Could Cal-Am break that into two agreements? And I only raised the question because I'm not advocating for this at all, but could there be an agreement to build the bypass pipeline separate from an agreement to buy the water?
Yes. Yeah. And so certification of the SEIR would greenlight construction of the bypass pipeline without resolving whether or not to expand Pure Water Monterey, because it's a component element of the SEIR. So once you certify, I think the way they had it set up before was conditional project approval for the expansion, but the remainder of the projects would be approved and they could file a notice of determination on the remainder of the project. So that would give the company the latitude to even go pursue new extraction wells if they wanted to that are in there and so forth. So the answer is, yeah, they can be split.
Would that be in our best interest?
Well, it would be absolutely in our best interest if we could resolve this by having Monterey One Water approve something so we don't have to get into it any further, number one. Number two, it sounds like the company wants to do this. We think it maximizes ASR, which, you know, we're very particular about. And they would get, you know, that $5.5 million or $5 million into rate base. It would have a function. It would be used and useful immediately. So yeah, I think it would benefit everybody, and we'd be happy because, you know, our guys with the dirty boots who are out there all the time, they want to make that project really work. And I think that there'd be, you know, large scale disappointment to know that it's being run at kind of half speed or not at all. But, you know, we've already made that pretty clear before that, you know, technical staff would like to see this project go forward, but there are bigger issues surrounding the, you know, the body politic on the permanent water supply projects and what does this pipeline represent relative to that. And we, you know, I think even the company said they understand the politics of it all.
Well, and I'm going to again spin off of Mary's question and suggest that my concern is that if the SEIR is approved, you know, we pay for our share and whatever it is, and then it can be bifurcated into two different approaches. It puts the complete control of the water future in Cal-Am's hands, it seems to me. We may get a bypass pipeline. We may get maximum use of water going north and south at the same time, but we don't get a water supply unless Cal-Am decides which water supply they want to pursue. It's entirely possible Cal-Am say, we'll take pure water expansion. It's entirely possible to say, we'll take the bypass pipeline. We're going to sit on the rest of this and see where it goes. So then it's in Cal-Am's hand about the schedule. It's Cal-Am's hands about what happens next. It also may be in the hands of the Coastal Commission more than even Cal-Am's hands. And so that's my concern, is giving up control. And I don't say we have control, but I would like us to have influence. And if there's a matter of where we might place our, you know, political, you know, flag, how do we do that? How do we play that out? It bothers me a little bit that it can be broken up into two projects, but it also separates the decision structure, I think, ahead of us and the unknowns related to all of that. That's my concern.
If I can, I'm not going to obviously comment on your political structure or influence or any of that, but I would just say, yeah, even if, you know, even if this parallel pipeline and say extraction wells move forward, you know, that doesn't put us in still a great situation for water, source water wise. We're still, in my mind, we're still, in my calculations, we're still running at a deficit there. So it's not, it helps us significantly, but it's not going to be a be all end all solution. That's for sure. We still need a water supply moving forward.
Well, and that's the difference in the supply projections or the demand projections going into the future. That's a difference of opinion.
Well, no, I think
yeah.
we would agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you have to have a permanent water supply, and we're not even going to see the CDO get lifted without a permanent water supply. So even if the company shows that they can remain compliant and not violate the CDO, they're not going to lift the CDO and the moratorium on new meters, because you can't demonstrate that there's a, you know, that you can make it 5 years or longer. So it's—
And to the example of, oh, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
No.
Well, and to Dave's example that he had presented at a previous board meeting where he outlined all the future source waters and how that would affect the CDO, that assumed 1,300 acre feet just to get to an 80 acre foot deficit. If you had last year with only 916 acre feet, that's that much more deficit even with ASR injection. So kind of thinking about it that way. And Carmel River, we're not going to be able to pump to the exact acre foot of 3376. Want to go over that. So there's challenges no matter what, but this will definitely, help, I think, the Seaside Basin in the interim somewhat.
Well, and the only thing I want to add, Chris, just so I can kind of, finish my thought here, that I think that the PUC rules are that if there is a viable water supply that's available to an IOU, and then there's some pressure to accept that water supply. And so I don't know how that plays out, but I think that's the angle that I'm kind of concerned about, that where might the district, depending on the rush to a solution or the effort to get to a solution, we may have a particular timing issue that we think is favorable to the district. That we might want to push, and I don't know where and how and all that might work and so on. It's just that I'm trying to remember a little bit about what the PUC rules are about an available water supply. Okay, opinion made. Any other questions from the committee? And I'll just ask the public in general, if there's any out there, to raise your hand somehow and let us know you're there. But Karen, do you have any, or Mary?
Well, we know we need a new water supply no matter what. This pipeline is not a new water supply. This pipeline, as I understand it at best, would enable us to overcome the constraints, send water in both directions, inject, removes that constraint. So maybe it enables us to get more out of the ASR project. But it's not a new water supply, which we still need. We could get that new water supply in something like 2.5 years if the expansion moves ahead. And to me, well, as you say, the way the EIR is currently written for the expansion, the pipeline is included, the bypass pipeline. What's holding all of this up is Cal-Am's unwillingness to contract to buy that water. So I agree with you, George. This is it's standing in the way, and it doesn't have to be this way. And I just think we've got to figure out how to remove that obstacle. We need the water supply. George, you referred to rules, CPUC rules. I don't think you meant rules so much as, there's language in the opinion saying, well, okay, we're authorizing in the 2018 decision, we're authorizing you to go ahead and construct the desal plant. But if it's not feasible for some reason, you got to go out and get a water supply some other way. And it looks like we're in that situation. And the State Water Board is also saying, Cal-Am, you should be considering other options at this point. So that's where we are. I mean, it's not sure exactly how we
navigate.
Well, we got to get out of this impasse. And I think if Cal-Am wanted to cooperate in getting a new water supply, it would enter an agreement to buy the expansion water. And we have to figure out how to make that happen.
And everything you say is spot on. I think we need to keep in mind that two things, we didn't bring this topic to your attention as a pitch to do the bypass pipeline immediately, even though it tends to indicate that. And we also didn't bring it as a stick to say, that we should be looking at doing Pure Water Monterey expansion and moving on with it, even though you make very good points. But the fact that we're in impasse is the second important point. Is as long as we're in this impasse, we have a problem. And the problem stems from that lack of ability to move water in both directions. And so that's the reason for bringing this to your attention, is that while we are still sitting on our hands and doing nothing to make any progress, and I say that that was the collective we as a community, which you could say includes the company. You know, while we sit here, we may not see a violation of the CDO, but we're living on the edge, and that's going to be a recurring theme. And so even if, let's say we don't get around to certifying the, Monterey One doesn't get around to certifying the SEIR in a timely fashion, and August arrives and we still don't have approval to do a bypass pipeline, well, we just move through the next water year and see how close we are and what the ramifications are. But there's going to be a 3-year period where we don't have a permanent water supply, where these issues are going to be a problem. And that's all this is. That's the reason for the attention. But Director Paul's right. If, you know, if
And
somebody
the people who are
amended,
gonna-
yeah, if somebody agreed to amend the water purchase agreement a year ago, we'd be halfway home by now.
Right. Mary, I think.
Yeah,
wanted-
I was just saying what's so troublesome about this is we're all sitting here looking at ourselves, but I think about all those people out here in the 5th district that I represent, who are the ones who are going to be faced with the decisions that we make. They're the ones who are going to have to be in real strict beyond conservation. I mean, it's really going to be very, very difficult for people. And that's, we are making decisions that impact them. I'm conscious of that.
Yeah. If I can venture, oh, go ahead, George.
No, go ahead, Chris. I do have something I want to add, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just venture one comment, and I'm going a little, you know, off on a tangent here, maybe too far in comment, but, you know, I think one of the items that, you know, would have to be vetted is the fact that, you know, Pure Water Monterey expansion was always promoted and, you know, done as a EIR as a backup, as an interim solution to desal. And so now, you know, it's being seen as a replacement. And I don't think that's by some, not all. I mean, there's a large part of the community that feels like desal is still needed, but I don't think that's been ever, you know, vetted. And I think that's a lot of where this issue rises is Pure Water Monterey expansion, you know, replacement of desal, or is it a interim backup to desal, which is kind of how it's been written and reviewed. So I think that's kind of the crux of the question there.
Do you know, I think if you ask many of us, I think, and a lot of people that I speak to as well, Chris, and I've said this to you before, I think many of us feel like we have got to have desal, you know, for the long term, you know, the 30-year lookout, we need to have some form of desal. The question is, are those just words? You know, I mean, I can tell you that that's what I believe we're going to have. But when it comes to the elephant in the room, you know, that's what we come right back down to again.
Well, I think that, yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see if we can have, I think we talked about it before, but I think we're starting to try and have some pre-meetings to discuss, you know, desal on a broader realm, and maybe that might move this bypass a little bit. That being said, I'm probably going outside of my realm right now, so I might have to stop there.
Yeah, but you know, you do touch on a couple of interesting word choices, and I think it's, you know, it's actually what kind of blew the minds of a couple of the Monterey One board members is, how did a backup suddenly become an alternative to the project that it was a backup for? So it was always originally envisioned to be a backup. Ian, who's on the call, introduced the word interim, because interim had kind of a shorter timeline to it, and it sounded like, well, okay, maybe as a stopgap measure. But as someone told me yesterday, hey, even 20 years is the interim. So, I mean, it could be viewed as interim, but it can't get built. The expansion can't get built just based on a 5-year bridge to an eventual desal plant. And so it was a backup under the assumption that it may be challenging to get desal done. But then, you basically got your permission to do desal at the Utilities Commission, but not the Coastal Commission. So, once you prove that it's viable, then I think the Coastal Commission kind of threw it into well, if the backup is viable, then it becomes an alternative. And that's, where all the semantics started to creep in. But I don't think we view expansion as an interim project, because you really can't finance and build off of, a $60+ million project off of a short-term need.
To be honest, this may sound strange, but I don't think it matters whether you think of it as as expansion as interim or permanent. It doesn't really matter in the sense that it is going to be interim in some sense, because as Mary points out, at some point we're going to need additional sources of water, and that may very well be desal eventually. And we may be talking 5-year, we may be talking 20 or 25-year interim solution, or maybe less. It doesn't matter. We need it, and we need it now as soon as possible, and it provides additional water. And we need the additional water, the sooner the better.
Right.
So to me, whether it's, okay, some people may have thought of it as interim. Okay, fine. You can continue to think of it as interim, but we need to have it. We need to do it.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Well, and I just want to pick up on both Mary and Karen's comments. It seems to me that the need for desal is greater than just what the peninsula needs. Marina Coast needs a water supply. And I've been very reluctant to be the banker, the peninsula being the banker for a desal, when a regional desal could have other bankers involved and therefore share the cost and maybe bring the cost down in general, but also provide the service to a broader community. That's just been an interest in mine for a long time. The thing I want to add, maybe to Dave and both Daves, Dave Laredo too, the thing about paying, you say $250,000, I think more for the expanded SEIR. That may be a valuable investment, because just thinking about it, even though it adds maybe 3-4 months to the decision or whatever the conclusion from Monterey 1, even though it may add months to that, it may protect somewhat against some litigation, because I assume there are holes, there's issues that have been raised from over a year now, and I don't know if they're legal or not, and that's not particularly my point. My point is that, is there a way to discuss the legal protection that may be created with an expanded SEIR that takes another 3 months to complete and so on? And I don't know when or how that can be discussed. I raise it now because that's part of my thinking. That's all I'm trying to say. And I don't need a response because it's not on our schedule for discussion and anything. But I hope somebody thinks about it.
I would just like to say one other thing, which is we have the technical staff, John and Chris. And I want to thank the technical people for educating us about these issues, for looking for solutions to the technical constraints, and to try to thinking through how can we maximize the investment into ASR and maximize the productivity of it. These are all good things, useful things, valuable things, and I appreciate, as a board member, being educated. I need to know these. We all need to know and understand these things. And obviously, you can engage with board members on the political and financial aspects that are, outside of your decision making authority. So we're having a conversation that's a little strange because you can't provide answers, you can't engage with us. You can't negotiate to sign a water purchase agreement, for example. And but I do appreciate the honest effort to assess the problem, propose solutions, and explain that to us.
Thank you. And I would just add, I mean, I was talking with Rich, our president, just today, and I think, a lot of these discussions we've talked about, he seems open to, more dialogue with people. So I don't think it's limited to, at my level. So.
Well, and I want to thank you, Chris, for joining us and giving us, first of all, your PowerPoint, because it gave us some information as well as the visuals to talk about.
Really helpful.
It was much easier to understand because of those bar charts, the way you layered them up and explained them. And Dave, you too, and trying to clarify these letters we've gotten recently and the relationship to the whole thing. I just think this has been an excellent discussion. I think it just keeps moving the education process along. And I'm just thankful that full committee participation as well as staff support across the board. If there are no other comments.
I just have one.
Okay.
We can do this.
Great conclusion. All right. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, everybody. John. All right. We're done. Meeting adjourned. Oh, no, wait a minute. I think there's one other question on the agenda about, do we have items for future suggestion?
Well, you actually have an update on the
Oh, yes.
right, which there's not much to say. The well drilling for the new deep well is proceeding. We just closed out February with about 266 acre feet of injection, which is a little lower than January, but it's also 3 days shorter. The project's working swimmingly well. It's going quite well. So.
Great.
Thank you. Well, and then I'll just go quickly to items for future agenda. I just think keeping the current events on our calendar for discussion is about as good as it gets right now, because I don't.
Yeah, and I'll take a look at your replenishment assessment question or email that I saw, see if there's some subject matter there that we can bring to this committee.
Okay, good. Good. Thank you. I sent Dave an email that I'm on the Water Master Board and I'm raising some questions over there, but I want Dave in the loop for some of this. Okay, no other comments? No other questions? We are adjourned. We are adjourned.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you, everybody.
This was a great meeting.
Very educational. I think so
It was a
too.
Great meeting. Thank you.